into the LSU game. So luckily for us here, Tyler Natuno used to work for LSU or did work with LSU. So he has a pretty good understanding of this team, better than I do or anyone watching probably. So let's get into our Florida LSU predictions. I'll let you start off.
Yeah, I mean, this is an LSU team that, first of all, I mean, lost a lot, especially on the offensive side of the ball from the team that the Gators saw last year. I mean, you guys, if you follow the NFL, you know it. Jaden Daniels, Brian Thomas, Malik Neighbors, these guys are all making big plays on Sundays, and they were making big plays on Saturdays for this team last year. And I mean, I don't think you'd be surprised to find out that without them, this isn't quite as explosive an offense as it was last year. It's still a successful one. Like, in terms of expected points added and offensive efficiency and stuff, it's a good offense, but it's not just killing you with big plays the way that they did last year. So I think coming into this year with this team, I was concerned about that and a defense that was really bad. Defense has maybe taken a few steps forward. I mean, this is a tough team to evaluate because defensively, they've sort of improved throughout the year, though the last two games have been major setbacks coming into this one, which I would have my eyes on if Lagway's on the field because, while Lagway's not Jalen Milroe and he's not Marcel Reed in terms of mobility within the pocket, he is a guy that can get outside and move around, and that's just something that LSU has not handled very well in recent weeks. I think – I don't know if I trust, I would say I was pretty high on Garrett Nussmeier still up until last night.
Yeah.
And I mean, we saw what happened in that game against Alabama, 42-13 loss. I think, this offense and Garrett Nussmeier, it's just not quite good enough. I think it's pretty obvious you can cause a lot of problems with this LSU team if you get pressure on them up front. I mean, A&M, only sacked him twice. Only sacked him once, I believe, and he'd only been sacked twice all year. But they got some pressure on him and forced some interceptions, forced 3 pretty bad interceptions in that game. So if Florida can do that, I think you're going to get bad. You're going to get like not Quinn Ewers. You're going to get Carson Beck-esque mistakes out of Garrett Nussmeier in this game. But you couldn't get that pressure on Quinn Ewers, and you got absolutely picked apart. So to me, and I'm not going to get, we'll get into score predictions in a little bit, but I think Florida winning this game is going to be so dependent on the health of the secondary and obviously the health of DJ Lagway because, I mean, LSU's going to score.
They might not score. I mean, so you talked about how he was only sacked once. Garrett Nussmeier was only sacked once against A&M or twice. I can't remember what you said.
I believe it was once.
That's a pretty common theme to where teams get pressure on LSU. I remember the South Carolina game. South Carolina was getting so much pressure on Garrett Nussmeier.
Yeah.
But Nussmeier is really good at avoiding sacks. So that's one thing you got to give him credit for. But then you put him on a hostile environment on the road. Maybe we're getting pressure. LSU, 2 tackles, first possibly both going in the first round. Will Campbell probably in the top 10. Will Campbell maybe more of a guard than tackle at the next level. I'm not going to be.
He's had a bit of a disappointing season.
Yeah.
Been good. Don't get me wrong. He's a good player. But a guy that was getting legit top 5 pick.
Yeah. I've seen mock drafts with my Jaguars taking him first overall. That's how good this guy is. But I feel like he does have a higher upside as a guard in the NFL than as a tackle. So maybe the Gators find a way to take advantage of him not being maybe as elite as you want. And the interior of this LSU offensive line, it feels like this LSU offensive line has 3 or 4 really good players on it, but they're not playing as good as a unit, which is allowing teams to get pressure on Nussmeier, which we've seen this Gator defensive front. We saw it against UCF, saw it against Tennessee, saw it against Kentucky. We saw it against Georgia, saw it a little bit early on against Texas, to where they're showing different things and they're getting pressure. And Garrett Nussmeier, he's an older player. I'm not saying older player, but he's been at LSU for 3 years now. But this is still only his 10th, 9th start going into this game. So he's necessarily not the most experienced. This might be the most hostile crowd he's faced. I mean, who?
Yeah,
Did they
Kyle
host
Field.
A&M? Okay, they
No,
went
they
to A&M.
played at
That's right.
A&M.
So, and we saw what happened against A&M. He threw 3 interceptions against them.
Yeah.
Had 2 interceptions last night against Alabama and a fumble that really ended the game mostly. So this is a guy that we know can turn over the ball, and this is a defense to where taking away that Texas game, the past month had been getting a bunch of turnovers. I think really that's going to be the matchup that really wins or loses Florida this game. Because when I look at the offense, I think this offense is going to be able to score 30 points pretty simply. Not easily, but I do think if this offense doesn't score 28 plus points, that it is a big failure, assuming Lagway is above like 90, 95%. That's how I'm making my prediction. Lagway is like almost 100% healthy.
Mm-hmm.
So going into this game, I can definitely see the defense holding this team because A&M, LSU against A&M, LSU scores 17 points.
Yes.
Okay. LSU against Alabama, they had 13 points, but that included a
garbage time. Yeah.
So I don't really see it. This LSU team is also now eliminated from the playoff. How much are they playing for? Has Brian Kelly built up the culture? I mean, that we've kind of seen at Florida since the beginning of the season, to where they're going to be down a bunch. But I mean, they can still play for 9 wins. They still can play for some momentum going into next year. So I'm very interested to see how that defensive-offensive matchup works.
Yeah, and I think looking back at what you were talking about getting pressure on LSU, I mean, I think to me, like, yeah, the absolute number one matchup I'm looking at in this game is LSU's offensive line, which is one of the best in the nation against this front, which now, granted, that offensive line is now without Garrett Dellinger, the starting left guard, one of the biggest veterans on the defense, had like a sort of like quick surgery. I don't think he's necessarily done for the year, but I don't think he's playing in this game. Mm-hmm. So, they're down a guy there, and they kind of are turning towards younger, not particularly experienced players. When it comes to depth on the offensive line, not great there. Granted, few teams have great offensive line depth, but
yeah,
I think that's something worth watching. And I agree with you. I mean, I think the offense can score if Lagway plays, and I don't think there's really any value in predicting this game in a world where Lagway doesn't play, because we're all adults here. I think we know what's going to happen if it's Aiden Warner again. So,
yeah. And then going a little bit deeper on the Florida offense versus the LSU defense, Whit Weeks has been turning it up for LSU. Probably been their best defensive. Definitely been their best defensive player, I'd say, since he started turning it up. Since Harold Perkins took his season injury. So when you look at it, I think this Florida offensive line has still been playing really well. LSU defensive line, I mean, they have Savion Jones. I'm not sure how many guys scare me on the LSU defensive line. I mean, maybe I'm missing someone. I mean, am I?
Braden Swinson, the edge rusher, has been one of the better edge defenders in the SEC this year.
Okay. So maybe I am missing on him, but I mean, Savion Jones is good. Swinson, that does, I remember that bit now, is definitely that good. But then, is that going to be enough to stop Florida's run game? Does Montreal also return to where maybe we get out to a slower start, but Montreal is beating them down? That's possible. And then you bring in Ball and Jackson to hit off the big plays later in the game. LSU secondary, I mean, you saw it earlier in the year, they gave up 400 passing yards to USC. I wouldn't say A&M could really throw on anybody with Connor Weigman nor Marcel Reed. No. Jalen Milroe was doing a lot of his work through the ground. So we haven't really seen this LSU defense in a while play a really good passing offense. And maybe we're not even a really good passing offense. Maybe we're worse than Alabama. But I do think their secondary is still really weak. Sage Ryan, he's not even playing, is he?
I don't believe so. I think he might be hurt right now.
So I do have some faith in this Florida offense to maybe you also get Lagway adjusted to making shorter plays. I mean, you look at him against Tennessee where he gets thrown in there kind of as the full-time guy. 100,000 fans in the stands, makes a little bit of mishaps with the short game. Then Kentucky didn't really have anything short going. I feel like Kentucky was also Kentucky didn't respect our deep ball at all for some reason that game.
Yeah.
And then Georgia, he gets hurt really on, so we don't even get to see him get a chance to throw short. So maybe LSU does play 3 deep safeties the entire game and just try to make Lagway beat him intermediately, which I think that could be what wins LSU this game.
Yeah, and I think Rob's comment right there about the front four. I'll just pull this up for a second because I think it makes a good point. This is where Florida could get into some real trouble in this game, is if they have to blitz and just get beat in the secondary. But I will say though, I think the matchup I do really like here for the Gators is assuming Badger and Lagway are playing. I really like this matchup against the secondary. I think LSU secondary. I mean, frankly, it's a talent deficiency. It's just guys that are, sophomores and freshmen that have been expected to develop that haven't really developed. So it's an issue. LSU's been decent against the run this year. I think the front seven, with the injuries they've had, has actually been surprisingly good. I mean, they lost a guy in Jacoby and Guillory who was like their only experienced returning defensive tackle, lost him early in the year. The Perkins loss was huge, although, like, Grant, to be fair, I think it almost looks like the defense has gotten better since Harold Perkins left. I almost wonder if they were getting like too cute with it in terms of how they were using him, because it wasn't, they had him lining up at like nickel. They were doing all sorts of kind of weird things with Harold Perkins, and now they've just got Whit Weeks, who's kind of the more traditional linebacker there, but he's all over the field. Flies over the field making plays. So I think. Florida runs the ball. We saw Florida run the ball against a good front four, and a team that knew that's all they were going to do. So I think Florida's going to get their own in this game on the ground. And I think if all the guys on offense are playing, you could see some big plays open up in the passing game for sure.
So I think it's time to get to our predictions. I'll start this off. Maybe it's the bias in me, but I feel like losing this game is gonna. If we lose this game, it might be on Billy Napier. I feel like there's just so many advantages in Florida's way. Like, maybe it's my bias, but look through the air. I think Florida should win that matchup. Look on the ground with Lagway. If he has his mobility, I think Florida's matchup on the ground is gonna be pretty good against our defense as well. So I feel like the offense maybe not score at will, but should be able to score enough to where then the defense comes in. If they can get pressure on Nussmeier, I think he's getting enough pressure on him. Caden Durham, the freshman running back for LSU, he's been pretty good this year. LSU has just been abandoning the run. Like, I don't think they're necessarily a bad running team. I think Brian Kelly, maybe it's just the rain games. I know that was a big thing people talked about. It's where Brian Kelly just gives up on the run for some reason in rain games and forces a QB to throw it 40 times. So I think if we get into one of those situations where we force them to throw it, I think Florida's going to win. I think Florida wins the game. I'm going to take the Gators to win the game 34-24.
Wow. So I can see, like we've talked about, I can see a reality where that happens. And we have to be operating under the assumption that Lagway's playing, even though I don't think that's a given. I'll say this. I think LSU looks pretty vulnerable the way they've played the last 2 games. And I think if you had asked me before the Texas game, knowing Lagway doesn't play, and we lose to Texas, I would still probably be feeling pretty good about the LSU game if he came back. The way the secondary got torched last week really scares me, especially with LSU's receiving core starting to get healthy. Chris Hilton Jr., a guy who had sort of like a bone bruise in his ankle in fall camp that became a prolonged injury, and he's just made his return in these last 2 games. So they're starting to get back to full strength on offense, and it scares me, especially with a lot of questions in the when it comes to the health of this secondary. I think Florida has a path to winning this game. Last week really took a lot of the wind out of my sails in terms of being optimistic about progress made. So I think I'm going to kind of go with the inverse of your score here. I think LSU wins this game. I'll say like 35-24.
35-24. I will say, we don't know the depth chart or the injury report that's going to come out. Devin Moore is another huge player that the Gators really need to be healthy. Because if Cormani is starting again, and the secondary just really hurt, I could definitely see to where my score prediction maybe was a little biased there, or a little slanting. Because I didn't even think about Devin Moore. If he plays, I do think that helps Florida a ton.
No, I mean it for sure would. I mean I think you need to get someone back in the secondary like that.